We will begin the eighth lecture on church history. Chapter 3: The Age of the Height of the Roman Catholic Church. The time period is from 1073 to 1303. Number 1. Pope Gregory the Seventh. 1. The situation of the Church at the time. The Emperor of Germany, interfering with the internal affairs of the Roman Catholic Church, claimed the right to appoint the Pope and bishops. Domestically, Germany's feudal lords held power, and the Church was in the hands of landlords. There was a time Catholic Church, in its corruption, had 3 popes, each claiming to be the legitimate pope. In this situation emerged Hildebrand, leader for the revival of the papacy and for the salvation of the Roman Catholic Church. He is also known as Gregory the Seventh. Number 2. The life of Gregory the Seventh. Gregory the Seventh was born to a carpenter of Soana, North Italy, in 1015. He studied at the monastery of Saint Mary. When Gregory the Sixth was driven out, Gregory the Seventh went to Germany with him. When Gregory the Sixth to Cluny of southern France and circuited various places to revive the papacy, Leo the Ninth became pope, and Gregory the Seventh was appointed subdeacon to exercise the power of the papacy. In 1073, he became pope at the age of 58, and this was when he was named Gregory the Seventh. Gregory the Seventh died at the age of 70 in 1085. Number 3. His achievements. Gregory the Seventh made it illegal to sell church offices. He stressed the celibacy of church officers. He gave the Pope the right to appoint positions and the right to manage property. He also said the Pope has authority over the king. Number 4. Conflict with King Heinrich IV of Germany. Heinrich IV stood against the Pope. There was a reason why Heinrich IV disapproved of the Pope. Bishops and the Church possessed half of all of Germany's land. However, with the right to manage property handed over to the Pope, the King of Germany had little power. It was for this reason Heinrich IV stood against the Pope. He colluded with Italy's against the Pope. He even convened the Synod of Worms in 1076 to depose the Pope. In reaction to this, the Pope excommunicated Heinrich IV. He declared that the people need not obey the orders of the king. It was in this situation that the humiliation at Canossa took place. Seeing the feudal lords stand in opposition against him, and that he was at a disadvantage, Heinrich IV decided to apologize to the Pope. In 1077, the Pope visited Canossa, and the king crossed the Alps and went to Canossa, where he 3 days nights pleaded on the snow for forgiveness. Doing so, he had his excommunication revoked. It appears as though King Heinrich IV surrendered, but he actually won. When the Pope excommunicated Heinrich IV and then revoked it, Heinrich IV was able to retaliate against the feudal lords who were against him. As this situation arose, the Pope once again excommunicated Heinrich IV. This time, the people had sympathy for the king. This gave the king more power, and they ended up capturing Rome. Gregory VII of southern Italy died on the road. Number 2, the relationship between the church and the state. 1. Pope Calixtus II and Heinrich V's Concordat of Worms. A. Pope Calixtus II excommunicated Emperor Heinrich V. However, the two, tired of fighting, came to an agreement. B. The details of the Concordat of Worms. The one who is elected as bishop will go to the Pope and receive from him ring and staff. And next, following the emperor's approval, he will take office. Previously, the emperor had the right to appoint people. When a bishop is appointed, the emperor will appoint him first, and then the pope will appoint him later. If the emperor says, "This man cannot be bishop," then the person will not be elected bishop. Number 2, the relationship between Pope Alexander III and Frederick I. Emperor Frederick I, knowing that the emperor had enormous power in the past, wanted to go back to the ways of the past. However, the Pope pushed for church law, and this resulted in 20 years conflict. Frederick I sent troops to Rome 5 times, but the Pope, with the help of the Lombards, defeated the emperor. In 1177, at the Church of St. Mark's in Venetia, the emperor got on his knees before Alexander III, kissed the Pope's feet, and surrendered. Number 3, the relationship between the Archbishop of Canterbury and King Henry II of England. The Council of the King of England called a council of bishops and nobles and issued the constitutions of Clarendon. Let us take a look at the details of the constitutions of Clarendon. Church officers are subject to the state's court jurisdiction, even concerning non-religious matters. Church officers cannot leave or enter the kingdom without the permission of the king. When electing an archbishop or bishop, the king's orders must be followed, and they must take place in the king's church. An appeal should come to the king, and the people must be loyal to the king. Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, rejected this law and fled to France. However, 5 years later, they made up, and the Archbishop of Canterbury returned. But on December 29th, 1170, Thomas Becket was killed at the Canterbury Cathedral by 4 assassins. The constitutions of Clarendon were revoked in 1172, and the king repented at Becket's grave. Number 4. Innocent III's policies. Pope Innocent III is a representative figure of the age in which the Pope had the greatest power. A. If we look at his beliefs, we see that he believed the Pope represents God and Christ, and that the Pope is king over the king, which means he can judge the king. Innocent believed that the Pope was lower than but higher than other people. He said that the right given to Peter to rule over the church was passed on to the Pope. B. Pope Innocent III's policies. Innocent III ordered King Philip II of France to marry his original wife when the king divorced. Let me tell you about the Pope's relationship with the King of England. King John of England disobeyed the Pope's order and did not approve of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Pope proceeded to excommunicate the King of England, and then he gave France control over England. When England gave in, the Pope restored him to power in 1213. See Special Notes. Pope Innocent III called for the Fourth Crusade. It was during this time that the Inquisition began. He also started the system of confession. Number 5. The relationship between Pope Gregory IX and Emperor Friedrich II. Because of the Crusades, Gregory IX excommunicated Friedrich II 3 times. However, Friedrich II gained ownership of South Italy and the island of Sicily. These lands had belonged to the Pope for 2. Friedrich II said, "The Pope rules the spiritual world, while God has put the Emperor as the head of worldly affairs. Therefore, the Emperor and the Pope are of equal standing." Number 6. The relationship between Bonifacius VIII and Philip IV. King Philip IV of France was against the prohibition of taxation of religious workers that was enacted in 1296. He was also opposed to the practice of sending gold and silver out of the country without the permission of the king. Pope Bonifacius VIII tried to excommunicate the kings. However, the Pope was taken captive in Anagni, which is near Rome, by cavalry sent by the King of France. The Pope was released, but the old Pope lived in the shame of being taken prisoner by the king until he died. Number 3. The Crusades. 1. The causes of the Crusades. The Muslims captured Jerusalem, and they mistreated those who made pilgrimages to the city. Furthermore, as famine prolonged the economic recession, people responded by becoming more devoted to their faith. Consequently, more people made pilgrimages. Bonus II convened the Council of Clermont in 1095. The council decided to organize an army and initiate the Crusades. Whoever participated in the Crusades was given a special grace, which was the forgiveness of all their sins. There were a total of 8 Crusades. Number 2. The series of events. 1. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. The leaders of the First Crusade include Godfrey of Bouillon, King Robert of England, and Hugo, younger brother of the King of France. About 300,000 people and England participated in the war. On July 15th, 1099, they took Jerusalem, and Godfrey became king. Number 2. The Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149. Here is what caused the Second Crusade. Edessa fell into the hands of Islam, and Islam threatened Jerusalem. Pope Eugenius III told Bernard to lead the kings in battle, and the kings of Germany and France responded positively to this. The Second Crusade was a failure, but because the people of Islam fought amongst themselves, there was peace for 40 years. Crusade, 1189 to 1192. The Third Crusade happened because the Muslims took Jerusalem once again on October 3rd, 1187. The English, French, and Germans worked together for the campaign. But German and French forces returned home during the war, and the English forces were the only ones to advance. A truce was made after the Third Crusade. The truce said that Muslims would not mistreat pilgrims. Number 4. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1214. This crusade happened because of Innocent III. They were able to capture Constantinople. They took Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. They were able to take the relics from the Eastern Church to the Western Church. Then they established a Latin Empire in the East and appointed Baldwin as emperor. A member of the Roman Church became Archbishop of Constantinople, and they were under the control of the Roman Church. This war caused a war between the Eastern and Western churches, and the Eastern Church and Western Church ended up hating each other more. Number 5. The Fifth Crusade, 1212 to 1221. This crusade is unique in that it is called the Children's Crusade because children were left with the mission to retake Jerusalem. 30,000 children, including Stephen the French shepherd boy and Nicholas the German boy, participated, and they advanced. The crusade ended as a failure. Ships were wrecked along the way, many starved to death, and the remainder of the children were sold as slaves. Number 6. The Sixth Crusade, 1227 to 1229. Emperor Friedrich II of Germany led the large army into Jerusalem. The emperor was not a believer, but he participated in the war to win the Pope's cooperation. Arrived at the Holy Land, but a 10-year truce was made. 7. The Seventh Crusade, 1248 to 1254. King Louis IX of France started the war with a religious passion. 10,000 soldiers were killed, and the king barely made it out alive. Number 8. The Eighth Crusade, 1270 to 1291. King Louis IX, who initiated the Seventh Crusade, began the war, and he ended up dying in battle. As a result of this crusade, Edward I went forward and captured Nazareth, and he signed a 10-year peace treaty. Consequently, following 12 completely owned Jerusalem. Number 3. Why the Crusades failed. The Pope, who was at the center of the Crusades, did not have the authority to command the military. Also, the noblemen and knights who participated in the wars had different objectives and understandings. At first, they had a religious fervor to reclaim God's land of Jerusalem. But as time went by, the passion faded. They began to plunder and have other bad motives. This was why they failed. Additionally, the military forces that fought in the Crusades were weak. The Muslims, however, aware of geography. Therefore, the Crusades had to end up as a failure. Number 4. The benefits of the Crusades. They were able to prevent Islam from entering the West. The empires of Europe were united through the wars. Also, people came to the realization that they were living in Christian nations. The nobles became weaker, the feudal system collapsed, and commerce and industry developed. Furthermore, the shipping industry developed, which led to the prosperity of coastal cities of the Mediterranean Sea. There was also a newfound knowledge about the Islamic nations. They were able to make contact with the East. The Roman Catholic Church increased its wealth, and the papacy was strengthened. Number 4. Scholasticism 1. Scholasticism was at the core of medieval Roman philosophy. Number 1. The different time periods. First, the birth of scholasticism, the 9th century to the 12th century. Second, the height of scholasticism, the 13th century. Third, the decline of scholasticism, the 14th century to the 15th century. Number 2, characteristics of scholasticism. It seems as though the word scholar comes from the name of Charlemagne the Great's palace school, which was called, served to organically harmonize faith and intelligence and religion and philosophy. They combined Christianity and Greek philosophy, and they also used philosophy to prove the church's doctrine. They readjusted theology to fit in with the times. Number 3, the value of scholasticism. They tried to rationally and philosophically prove Christian truths. Scholasticism assisted in the prevention of the erroneous explanation of the truth. Number 4, the flaws of scholasticism. Scholasticism thought lightly of historical criticism, and it built ideas. Third, it attempted a legendary interpretation of the Bible. Because it applied too much formal logic, it came up with ridiculous sophistries. Scholasticism adopted theories that are not seen in the Bible or in church history. Number 5, representative scholars. Number 1, Scotus Erigena. Born in Ireland, he worked at a palace school in France in 845, and he was treated well. He wrote Dionysius Areopagita and Divisione Naturae. He had a very pantheistic belief system. Number 2, Anselmus. Anselmus was from Italy. He lived a monastic life at the Bec Abbey in France. He became abbot in 1078, and in 1093 he was elected Archbishop of Canterbury. After a conflict with King William II, he was banished from the country. However, King Henry I of England summoned him to England, where he died in 1109. He wrote Monologium, Proslogium, and Cur Deus Homo. Number 3, Peter Abelard. He was born in France in 1079. When he was 22 years old, he founded a school in Paris and taught philosophy there. He was very famous in Notre Dame in 1115. He made the mistake of secretly marrying Eloise and was castrated by his uncle. He had several thousand disciples when he was abbot. At around 1140, he was declared a heretic, and he died 2 years later. let us take a look at his beliefs. He advocated the liberal study of theology. He said that God's revelation was limited to faith, hope, love, and sacraments. He also said that prophets and apostles could be wrong too. He denied the idea of original sin. He believed in atonement, but he believed in the moral influence theory of atonement. He said that the cross reminds the sinner to repent. Number 5, French mysticism. There are two major thought systems of the Middle Ages of Europe. First is scholasticism, and second is mysticism. A representative mystic figure is Bernard. Bernard was born to a noble French family. His father died during the First Crusade. His mother was a devout believer and was the son out of 7 children. When he was 23 years old, he and 30 noblemen entered the Citeaux Abbey. 2 years later, he and 12 companions entered the Clairvaux Abbey, where he served as abbot and spent the rest of his life. During the Second Crusade, he convinced people to participate in the war. Bernard, having a more conservative viewpoint, rejected Abelard's liberal ideas. He longed for Christ who suffered. He distinguished the types of love we have for God. Let me tell you about the Cistercians. The Cistercians inherited the spirit of Bernard. Wastelands, farmed, evangelized pagans, and spread the Christian culture. This concludes the 8th lecture